Welcome back to Sunburnt Soul. I'm your host, Sarah. This is a space where we explore the healing journey, one story, one chart, one laugh at a time. Season 1 is when Chiron speaks. It is a deep dive into the wounds we carry and the light they can become. So, in episode 1, we met Chiron. Today, we explore the first heartbreak, the wound of abandonment. I like this quote. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the absence, it's believing we were never wanted. So to dive straight into the episode, um, I want to talk about Chiron's myth, the origin of the ache. So Chiron, he was a centaur who also was a great healer. And pretty much the story of, in a nutshell, is that he was a wounded healer. And the wound for him came from his parents. His father was the Greek god Cronus, who transformed himself into a horse and then procreated with the nymph Philyra. So, of course, not of course, but just like because the dad Kronos had turned into a horse, when Chiron was born, he was half human, half horse. Because of this, his mother Philyra rejected him for being too monstrous. So, in essence, he was abandoned by both sides or both lineages, if you will, because his dad is a Greek god and considered divine, and his mother was mortal. So almost kind of like he was considered too different to be claimed, because he was in between those two worlds. And what Chiron represents symbolically is rejection of parts of ourselves that don't fit in. Which is why I love the story of Chiron so much, because I mean, the best kind of version is like Hercules is the closest thing I can think of, but Chiron more specifically focuses on the struggle of the two being abandoned, and then the wounded healing part, like being a healer who also is carrying their own wound. I just think that's a really good story, something I could definitely relate to. What abandonment wounds look like. The most modern way that I can find, this is where the psychology or the mental health kind of kicks into this podcast, is that attachment theory. So there's generally 4 attachment styles. There's secure, avoidant, anxious, and then disorganized. So ideally, everyone, you would want to have a secure attachment, but that's not always possible. Life is and people are flawed. But a secure attachment looks like, parents are protective to their child, they're emotionally available, responsive, and they're attuned to the needs of their child. And ultimately they grow up in relationships, people with secure attachment style or people who can learn to have secure attachment style. It's like you want emotional and physical intimacy with others, you want relationships, but also too it's like you're not anxious. You if someone, for example, if you're in a relationship with someone and they no longer want to be with you anymore, you let that, it might be painful, you might grieve the relationship, but you're able to move on. Um, and you're also willing to kind of enter into another relationship without fear of rejection. Like everyone's going to have a fear of rejection, but it's like a healthy fear. It's not going to stop you from being in relationships. It's not going to stop you from being intimate. And then also too, you're not anxious if other people create distance or if they're willing to leave. You respect their decision. Of course it's going to hurt, but it's not as if like it rattles your cage when someone leaves. And so with saying that, I'm speaking about avoidant and anxious, where avoidant attachments is the parents were unavailable, they didn't know how to meet their child's needs, or they left them alone a lot, or they simply just rejected their child. So people with a avoidant attachment style, typically they're going to be afraid of physical and emotional intimacy, and they're almost like hyper independent. Not like you don't want to be codependent, but they're hyper independent where they're not even like interdependent to other people. They don't know how to have a healthy balance of I rely on you and you rely on me versus always relying on themselves. And then there's anxious attachment style, where the parents were inconsistent with being responsive, available, or in tuned, can be intrusive. There might be an issue with maybe this child never knew what healthy boundaries look like, and that's something that, if you have this attachment style, you're going to have to like learn over time in order to get closer to that secure attachment. And then another thing is, I think a big thing about the anxious attachment is that the parents prioritize their own emotional and physical needs over their child. So people with this attachment style, what it looks like in adulthood is that maybe they might jump into relationships too soon before vetting the person that they're going to be in a relationship with, or they might be a little bit too trusting. And then there's also like a hyper vigilance, with is if this person looks mad, are you mad at me today? Or it could be like you're always kind of like this is where people pleasing kind of stems from. It's because you're used to maybe a parent withdrawing themselves if you didn't behave that they wanted, but then if you were doing everything that you were supposed to do in their eyes, then they would reward you with affection and attention and attending to your needs. So we talked about secure, avoidant, and just anxious. And then the last one is disorganized. So the thing about disorganized is that children who grow up with parents who are either frightening, threatening, or frighten themselves, or it causes them to disorient and kind of compartmentalize their caregiver, because their caregiver is literally someone that they see as dangerous, but then also someone that they have to go to for their needs. So disorganized is a combination of avoidant and anxious. They are avoidant if they feel like their caregiver um is dangerous or not safe, or someone that they can't like be emotionally available to, or someone who's not emotionally available, versus and then they're also anxious, where they're anxious where like, okay, maybe this person, this caregiver is going to provide my needs, what do I need to do? And they're hypervigilant to kind of performing or behaving in a way that allows that caregiver to finally fulfill their needs, because they don't do it all the time. Those are the different attachment theories, and honestly, like, going back, the disorganized in adulthood, what it looks like is, literally both. Like, these, people might go back and forth with being avoidant, being afraid of intimacy, and kind of backing away from people when they seem a little bit too needy or clingy, quote, unquote. And then they might also be anxious in a certain standpoint where they're like, okay, maybe this person seems like they're safe right now, so let me like be hyper vigilant. Let me people please. Let me try to do something to get this person to fulfill my needs. Those are attachment styles, and those are what we carry from childhood until now. And you can kind of say that almost like if I were to kind of like figure out what Chiron's attachment style, it's clearly avoidant because he was rejected by his parents. And so there's what abandonment wounds look like could be feeling emotionally invisible, not prioritized. Caregivers were physically present but emotionally distant. Always being the helper, the strong one, but never nurtured yourself. Romantic partners pulling away when we needed closeness. And then also, like I mentioned before, the overachieving, the people pleasing, the fear of being too much. These all stem from childhood, but the hope is that with healing and being conscious of what our attachment style is, you could Google this, look at YouTube videos made by like licensed therapists and other licensed mental health professionals who are able, or you could just simply just go to therapy. I know that it's not affordable, but there's different ways to kind of like figure out like what is my attachment style, and recognizing your traits in yourself, and then also kind of realizing, okay, what do I need to do to heal this, what getting the resources and making the steps. um so, what abandonment wounds look like? We carry the wound of not being chosen by others and often recreate it by abandoning ourselves. So, to avoid abandoning ourselves, it's important to know what Chiron is in your birth chart. Now, this is where the astrology kicks in. Knowing what Chiron, what sign it is in, and what house it is important, because if you know the sign, you can kind of figure out what type of wound, because every sign is masculine or feminine. Oh, I can't speak. Every sign is either masculine or feminine. So you can kind of imagine like, okay, do I have more so of a father wound or a mother wound or overlap of both? So that's like definitely something to look into. Obviously, like the fire signs and the air signs are masculine, and the water signs and the earth signs are feminine. So if depending on the sign, and also too, if you know what your sun sign, the sun sign are, oh, your parents' sun sign, that also can kind of let you know, like, hey, I got Chiron in Virgo and my mom happens to be a Virgo, that's something to look into. You know, you could most definitely say that that probably is a mother wound. And then look at the house. What house is it in? Because that will tell you the area of life most affected. Each house is ruled by a sign, yes, but it also kind of tells you specifically like what, because it doesn't just rule the sign, um, it also rules areas of life. So, for example, I'm just going to quickly make a quick example. So, say if you have Chiron and Sagittarius in the eighth house. Now, Sagittarius is a masculine sign. So, you would look into possibly it being a father wound and looking that up online, looking that up on YouTube by therapists and seeing what that looks like and how to heal that, how to work on that. And then if it's in the eighth house rules sex, death, regeneration, kind of like the phoenix of something dying and kind of being rebirthed. Honestly, if I looked at that, just putting it in simple words, Chiron in Sagittarius in the eighth house, that would look like a wound that stems from someone who wasn't able to be free or expressive or kind of create their own philosophy when it comes to sex and death and regeneration. I would look into this person, seeing if they possibly have like some type of like sexual trauma that's still affecting them, or maybe there was a death in the family that kind of prevented them from being able to be expressive or to grieve or to explore their sexual nature. You know, I kind of feel like that's how you kind of have to see it. See what the sign is, what the house is, and then you could always just look it up online, and then once you kind of can put it to words, then you can kind of reach into the mental health and the psychology and like look at particularly like what is probably the thing that you are wounded by the most, you know? Okay. And then sorry, my laptop is freaking out. It's freaking out. Okay. So then, kind of like I was talking about before, the healing begins with self-reclamation. So there with this, it's a lot of inner child work. By the way, let me say this caveat before I kind of get into how to heal. Let me just speak of what healing looks like. Um so healing is not linear. You just don't take one step after the other. Sometimes healing can definitely look like one step forward and three steps back. That's might actually how it might feel. Even though you're making good progress, it's like it might not look the way you might think it does. The whole point of healing too is that you might have to try and practice multiple times before you finally pick up a skill. You know, like once you kind of find, like, for example, say if you have an anxious attachment style and you realize, okay, I have an anxious attachment style, what does that mean? You start to look it up. You're like, okay, people pleasing, what is that? Oh, okay, people pleasing is being nice but not really being good or true to yourself. You know, it's overextending yourself. And then also too, like, I've been researching this, I don't know, like, I'm still kind of in the, I don't know. I'm in the middle ground about it because, you know, like some people say that people pleasing is another form of manipulation, which is true, but I feel like the root of it was a child just trying to meet their needs. So trying to make it seem like it's, you know, a sinister thing is a little, like, I think a little too much, but that's just my opinion about it. Because honestly, we learn these attachment styles because we were just trying to survive. You know, we all have been babies or children. If you're human, that's a whole nother episode. If you're not human, but if you were born human, and with all this talk of aliens and stuff, but if you were born human, you were a baby, and then you were a toddler, then you were a child, and so on and so forth, right? So when you're a baby, babies can't walk. Sometimes, like, depending how, if they're a few days old, few weeks, they can't do anything for themselves except cry. So it's like you learn from who's ever taking care of you. You figure out how to get your needs met. Everyone is just trying to get their needs met. And as a child, you can't do that on your own, you know? Like a 5-year-old, like we've like there's movies like Matilda and Home Alone where those children were a little bit like left alone a little too much, and they were able to like figure out how to feed themselves and go to the store and stuff like that. But you could see that those are examples of avoidant attachment styles, right? That those children built up, because it's almost like leads them to be hyper independent, right? Anyways, I kind of went on a tangent, but to kind of go back to what I was saying, healing is not perfect, and it's not linear, and it's not going to look like a step-by-step process. One day you might have to look up and practice step 4. One day you might have to go back to step 1, like, oh my god, I totally didn't see that I was people pleasing at work. Let me go back to square one and figure it out. And if you have to do that, that's okay. Like, um, it's kind of like almost like fighting an addiction, you know? Sometimes you fall off the wagon, and even if you fall off the wagon 50 million times, the point is that if you keep continuing to get back on the wagon and you keep trying, like that whole like cliche or cheesy quote of like you never truly fail until you like stop trying or something like that. So I would say think of it that way. So to kind of go into like that what you actually need to do for healing once you're prepared, and also know that another thing too, healing, things will bubble up. People think that when they first start therapy that they're just going to automatically start feeling better, and that's usually not the case. Your therapist, if they're a good therapist, they're supposed to challenge you and make you see yourself in ways that you might have not seen before, and that might be in not the most positive light, but that how do we get better if we don't see how we're kind of like in essence messing up? So a good therapist will challenge you and make you see yourself in ways that are conducive to healing, which allows you to see maybe your faults, your flaws, and things that you are able to change. And that takes work, and that takes self-awareness, and that's admitting that, hey, I have been wrong in this area of life, or I've been wrong to these people. How can I do better, and how can I practice, and how can I make amends? It's almost like healing is like a 12-step thing. Because I was watching this interesting, like, video online. I don't know how to say his name. Rami Yosef. He was basically the one who created Rami. It's like a show on Hulu. No promo. I'm too small for that promo stuff, but you get what I'm saying. Like, he was saying that everyone is essentially a good person, but they're just infected with greed. They're infected with, I don't know, being a bully. They're infected with hate. They're infected with the negative things that make you think that they're an evil person, but they are a good person. They've just been infected. And attachment theory is just a way of kind of seeing like what kind of infection does this person have. More specifically, Chiron tells you how was this person wounded, and how has that wound festered and what has that wound festered into. Like, you can't treat an infection, or yeah, you can't treat an infection if you don't know where the wound is. And that's the whole point of this Chiron series. So specifically, what can you do to heal, now that I'm back on that? Is inner child work. And what that looks like is if there's like vivid memories of you being a child, and specifically like in that moment, it's very painful because either you were rejected or left alone or harmed or hurt or some type of way. Like, healing is not easy. So this stuff is not easy, mind you. It takes a very brave person and self-aware person to try to heal this stuff, because it's not easy at all. When you think about a memory as a child, the ones that you can remember, because we're not going to remember everything, but we could feel everything. So the ones you can remember, just see yourself. Like, for instance, say if you were in school and you were being bullied by another kid, and you looked to your teacher and your teacher did nothing. They saw what that student had said. You talked to them. The teacher didn't do anything. Whether that teacher meant to like not say anything on purpose, or simply they were overwhelmed, because being a teacher is not an easy job, regardless, kind of see yourself in that situation as a child and imagine what it would have been like for a healthy adult to kind of step in and defend you and kind of give you the reassurance that, hey, like that other kid, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do I say this? Like, be that healthy adult and tell that kid, like, hey, that's not okay to call this person A, B, or C. And telling the child, hey, what should have happened instead is that your teacher should have put a stop to it and also gave you some comfort. If it were appropriate, should have given you a hug, told you that it's going to be okay, and to tell you next time that, if that happens again, and they will do something about it, kind of reassuring yourself as a child that you see from that memory, giving yourself that comfort and the reassurance that you are safe, even if this person or this other child or this other external force is trying to make you feel some type of way about yourself, That's one way of kind of doing inner child work. Because what you're doing essentially is naming what you needed and didn't get. If you have an avoidant attachment style, you needed closeness, you needed physical and emotional intimacy with your parent, you needed someone to be attuned to your feelings, you needed to feel accepted. And naming that and knowing that and just accepting the fact that you didn't get that, you know? If you have anxious attachment style, understanding that you needed someone to be consistent. You needed someone to show up for you every day, A child needs to eat every day. A child needs to be talked to, have attention every day. These are not things that you do periodically or when you feel like it. So understanding that that's something that you were missing in your childhood. And if you have disorganized, then it was a little bit of both. You needed closeness, but then you also needed to, when you were close, you needed to feel safe. So naming the thing, and it can be a grieving process to really grieve that you didn't get like the parents. And mind you, people are human. As I said, I'm starting to kind of like think about that idea that I just mentioned where everyone is a good person, but they've just been infected. And if you see it that way, you kind of realize, okay, like in so many ways that this parent, is not evil, but they've been infected by something that didn't allow them to be the parent that I needed. And also it has infected me in how I move in the world. What is my wound? And then let me start to heal that. But also too, understand it can be a little painful at first. Like when you clean a wound, it like you can clean with hydrogen peroxide and get that dead skin and all the dead like cells off of it, but then sometimes you might need to use a little burning like rubbing alcohol to really kill the germs, and sometimes that is a painful process. So be patient and give yourself time and grace. Um So yeah, and then and it's okay to say like, "Hey, I didn't get what I needed." It's not that like you're going and berating people and, yelling at them and cussing them out and being like, "Hey, you blah blah blah." Like, no, it's just kind of like just admitting like, "Hey, I probably needed more hugs as a kid." And what can I do that as an adult? Like, I could try to hug the people that I'm close to in an adult life. I am my pet. If you have a dog or a cat, like you could cuddle with them. If you were missing that physical intimacy, you could get a weighted blanket and put that over yourself and sleep with that every night to kind of give yourself of that feeling of that cocoon, or that feeling that you get in the womb that a baby gets from being kind of like surrounded and caressed, in the womb and being put in the fetal position. There's many things you could do in adult life, because what will happen is that if you didn't have certain needs met, excuse me, if you didn't have certain needs met in childhood, then that will carry over to adulthood and you will unconsciously be just looking for your needs to be met. And my hope is that, this will cause you to kind of think of your unmet needs from childhood in a conscious way and to find healthy solutions to getting these needs met. Because what it looks like in real time is being in toxic relationships, um, substance use, just kind of moving in an unconscious way where you're just kind of moving through life and not really understanding why you tick and behave and move the way that you do. Kind of to like close all of this up, we talked about what abandonment looks like, how it makes you feel. What can you do to kind of recognize how your wounds have affected you? What that wound looks like, addressing it, naming it, calling it, doing your research when it comes to looking at your birth chart, your attachment style, and just kind of learning to parent yourself, because sometimes the maybe your actual biological parent didn't do everything, and it's impossible for someone to do all of the parenting, to be completely healed. To be human is not being completely healed. That's the whole point of Chiron, is that you're learning to live with your wound, but also try to do your best to heal with what you were given in life, you know? Um, so the last question I pretty much have is like, where did I first learn I was too much to be loved or not enough to be kept? With that, I just want to conclude that like, healing takes time, and it's a process, and I say not to rush the job. It's not a rush job at all. And then with that being said, you don't need to earn your place. You've always belonged. And so for the next episode, I'm going to explore how the body stores unspoken pain and how Chiron may live in the somatic self, okay? So, of course, like if you could subscribe, leave a comment. I'm going to start responding to comments more more frequently, so I apologize if you commented and I haven't said anything. I see your comments and I'm going to answer. It's just a matter of when, not if. And of course, share your thoughts, and thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.